The Trump administration is pushing for a change in mission for NASA. Vice President Mike Pence has called for American astronauts to return to the moon by 2024. The White House has also proposed a Space Force, a military branch focused on space. This all comes ahead of the 50th anniversary of the first moon landing in July.
A new book called American Moonshot, John F. Kennedy and the Great Space Race takes a closer look at America's first space missions and how the Kennedy administration changed the world. Historian Douglas Brinkley is the author of that book, and he joins us now. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
So as we were saying earlier, John F. Kennedy is a boyhood hero of mine, and I've listened and watched that speech over and over again when he proposes sending a man to the moon by the end of the decade. How monumental was that speech? And I've always been interested in the mechanics of government after the president makes a speech like that. What happens?
Well, at that case, it shocked everybody. On May 25th, 1961, Kennedy goes to a joint session of Congress and says, we're going to the moon by the end of the decade. Everybody at NASA, the engineers were like, no, we aren't. We have no technology to do anything near that. But here the president just put that marker out there. And so it became a hurry-up, almost wartime economy. You remember in World War II, we could do D-Days and the Manhattan Project and big things quickly. So they're going to the moon was kind of a hangover effect from the Second World War. And immediately, Kennedy got money from Congress, bipartisan, because there were the people on the left that wanted science. 1960, science was Times Person of the Year. Generic
that's
science.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so it was in the expert science, and Kennedy equated the stars as the new ocean, that our galaxies were going to be like Christopher Columbus and Magellan, and now we were going to have Voyagers, space travelers. And the public was in the mood. Aviation was booming. You started getting hub airports growing. And space became the coin of the realm of what was a superpower.
And so America does it. It happens. And then never goes back again. Why?
First off, once we went and Nixon was president, we kept going back after Apollo 11 a few more times, but then Nixon killed 3 Apollo missions, money. The conservatives thought of it as big government, and liberals said put the money into urban poverty, education. So it kind of got dangled out there. Yeah. And once you do the first, one of the problems, but how Kennedy pulled us off is he framed going to the moon in sports terms. He even at Rice University, where I teach, he said, why does Rice play, Texas in football? It's a challenge. And he sold it as such. But once we met that challenge, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon, you could just watch the funding shrink.
And was it also sort of geopolitically, maybe the U.S. didn't need it anymore? At that point, it was a way to sort of show supremacy in a way? Yeah,
we went to the space shuttle. And then during the Reagan years, you have the great Challenger disaster. And then you had a blue ribbon panel looking into that. And then there were always some high moments, but it didn't become this must-watch television moment. In the 1960s, all of these Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo missions, you had to watch. I mean, they were killing it in ratings. I mean, the day Neil Armstrong went on the moon, 550 million people watched.
That's an insane number when you think about 550 million people.
How many people had TVs?
Watching. Right. I mean, exactly.
And wherever you were in the world, would get it on radio, or people would gather around, and it made people feel good about America. It was our global ambassador, Apollo 11. Everybody said congratulations. And even though the Vietnam War was going on at the time, which angered much of the world, they admired American space technology and can-doism, and we got a lot of great spin-off technology from going to the moon, things like GPS and anti-icing devices and CAT scans and MRI and kidney dialysis.
Wow.
I remember Tang, my grandmother saying to me, because I love Neil Armstrong. That was sort of the thing I was going to ask you. You mentioned this idea of these space explorers that were Magellan-like in the way that the public perceived them. Of course, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, you said those names, and they were larger than life. And what I've always been really fascinated by is after 1967, when the Apollo 1 accident happened, Gus Grissom, who was the original Gemini astronaut, was killed, you would have thought that the public would have said, you know what, this moonshot is perhaps something that we do not want to waste, valuable American lives trying to do. And yet we continued, we persevered.
Good question. That moment was almost when Apollo died and the moon, Kennedy's vision got killed, because we lost 3 astronauts in the launch pad at Cape Canaveral with Apollo 1, 1967, Chaffee and Grissom and White. And people said, you're going to have dead astronauts.
Right.
How in the world is this weird cockamamie idea of lunar landing and then connecting? One thing goes wrong, and now America's going to be embarrassed globally. We tried to send people to the moon and we couldn't. Instead of it standing for can-doism, it would have been about decline of American technology. So the risks were high. And you know, we used to take larger risk. We're much more risk averse in the United States now than we were certainly in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. But you know, now there's we did, the Caltech's Jet Propulsion Laboratory has pushed forward Mars exploration, the rover and the like. We've had women in space. You know, there's astronauts galore. We can, all over the country, there are people that have experienced spacewalking or been in space. So we'll see whether there can be a new energy to returning to the moon or not. If so, this summer's 50th anniversary will be the jumpstart moment.
Well, you talked about, and you sort of described this when you talked about all the people watching, that in your book you described this moonshot as a shared national endeavor that will transcend partisan politics. So we certainly know we're in the middle of a lot of partisan politics in terms of bickering and divisions in this country. It's something that we talk about often, actually, is how divided this country is. Could this new push to back space travel, even if it is Space Force,
a mission to Mars,
or a mission to Mars, or yeah, you know, I mean, how much do we talk about this all-female spacewalk?
Right.
We're so disappointed. Do you think this could be one of these things that pulls us together?
It can be, but you know, I interviewed Neil Armstrong and about why, you know, what his career. I did a 6-hour interview with him before he died for my book, and he just said, you know, the cosmology has to be right. All these pieces, you've got to have the right political climate, you have to have the right adversary, the reason. All these things have to work.
The right adversary. That's so interesting.
Well, and now it may be China.
Right.
China's starting to say we're going to the moon, and I think that's one of the spurs for why President Trump's saying, and Vice President Pence, go back to the moon. Will there be a China-U.S. competition or not? The difference people have to know, there's one thing to go to the moon for peaceful exploration, but also Trump is doing this Space Force, which is a militarization of space and creating of a whole new branch of the military. That's not going to work. Because Army doesn't want it, Navy doesn't want it, Air Force doesn't want it, Marines don't want it. They don't want a new branch. They'll lose all that congressional appropriations for a whole new entity. So now you have not only arguments on Capitol Hill, but you have within the military defense structure people not liking it. So I think NASA is the way to go, but also the private sector working with NASA, people like Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin, and you have all of them, Musk and Branson. So there's something going on. The waters are churning to go back to the moon and to eventually get to Mars.
Let me ask you, Douglas, before we let you go, you talk about the militarization of space as proposed by this Space Force that President Trump is calling for. Was there a sense from American politicians in the 1960s that another reason, beyond just the fact that this will show how great this country is in the age of exploration, space travel, that the Russians, had they gotten to the moon first, would have militarized space? There was a fear from American politicians, and we remember the times. I mean, we're not that old, but I was born in the 60s, so I kind of remember this, the Soviet Union looming very large in our consciousness. Was there a sense from American politicians before we landed on the moon that if we don't get there first and the Russians do, then they'll be shooting lasers at us from space?
There was. I mean, Kennedy, when he debated Nixon in 1960, presidential debates, said directly to Nixon, if we continue with Eisenhower-Nixon policies, I see a Soviet flag planted on the moon. I want to see an American flag planted on the moon. Because it wasn't just going to the moon. If you could figure it out, the technology you would have with weather satellites, telecommunications satellites, anti-satellite, anti-defense missile satellites, rocketry for military uses, ICBMs or intermediate range missiles. So it's a complex of things going to the moon, and it would show supremacy in the skies. And we take for granted how we're creatures of satellite culture. But in the
more than ever.
More than ever. And Kennedy's the one who got our country in the satellite game in a big time way.
All right, Douglas Brinkley, good luck with the book.
Yes,
Thank you.
really excited to read
I
it. Thank you,
appreciate it.
Douglas.
So American Moonshot is available at bookstores and online today.